So, hello everyone, and welcome to Kids Grief Matters. My name is Danielle. My pronouns are she, hers, and this is my coworker Colleen. Wave Colleen. Pronouns also she, hers. And we're really excited to have everybody today. We do want to start off before we go too far and just acknowledge the land that we are situated on. So, Hospice Simcoe acknowledges that we are situated on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe people, and that includes the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. We really do honor, or we're dedicated to honoring this history and culture, and we want to move forward, and we're committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation with all First Nations and Métis Inuit people. So with that being said, we're very, very grateful to be on this land, to be with this opportunity to be with Keri-Lyn. So Keri-Lyn is someone that Colleen and I have met in our quote unquote travels with Hospice Simcoe. So she comes from a fellow hospice in the area in Simcoe County. And so I will let Keri give a further introduction. Just a couple quick housekeeping. This is being recorded, but nobody can see you or hear you. So if your dogs bark or your kids scream, that's okay. Let it happen. There is an opportunity down at the bottom. There is a chat box and there's also a Q&A. So we really, really encourage you to get in touch with us, to ask questions, to be engaged. Colleen, did I miss anything?
And yeah, as Danielle mentioned, we are recording, and afterwards, or after tonight, we will be posting this to Hospice Simcoe's YouTube channel. So if you'd like to rewatch it or anything, it will be available there.
Yes, awesome. Thanks so much. So with that being said, I will hand it off to Keri-Lyn to give a further introduction. And thanks so much, Keri. We're so excited for tonight.
Thank you both. I am also very excited. I'm going to get busy sharing my screen and get this this evening started. I would also like to, I am at Hospice Georgian Triangle, which is located in Collingwood, Ontario, and that is, I would like to acknowledge that I'm an uninvited guest on the unceded territories that are recognized by the Treaty of 1818 between the Lake Simcoe and Nottawasaga peoples. And again, I completely reinforce what Danielle has shared with us, that I am actively working as a settler towards learning more truths and towards reconciliation with the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people of Canada who have been here since time immemorial. I come to you tonight because I really want to bring attention to an issue that in my professional life, and I know in the lives of Danielle and Colleen, we've discussed this as well, that our children, quite frankly, are not okay. I've read some articles recently where, you know, the kids are okay and this is that, and kids are resilient, and yeah. That's terrific, except that there are ways that we can support our littles and our young people. And so tonight's really an exploration of some of those strategies that we at Hospice Georgian Triangle, but I know are happening across the regions in hospices, and some little takeaways and strategies that you can take with you back into your lives that you have with your own children and young people. These are my own thoughts, unless cited, and if I say something that has, you'll notice that there's a citation. I'm a full-time doctoral candidate at Lakehead University in Thunder Bay, and I study dying, death, and loss education. I also work part-time for Hospice Georgian Triangle, but please understand I'm not being paid by any corporation to deliver this talk. So before we really get into the thick of things, I think it's really important that we all have an understanding of what I mean when that feeling that we're feeling right now is mourning are very much sort of experiences that we can understand. And then grief is something that is an ongoing process or an experience that we move forward with. So bereavement is that raw first grief, when something does happen that is either a loss that is death related or a loss that's not death related. Bereavement hits us hard. That's that raw impact of grief. Mourning is the external expression of that inner experience. And in times gone by, especially when I was a little girl, it was very clear when I was a little girl at a wake or a funeral who was there, who was definitely in mourning. There were colors, there were symbols, very much through a Western lens, but it was very clear who was mourning. Grief, however, is something that we've come to understand as more of an experience that is impactful for us, but then we learn how to carry with us. Grief isn't something that we tie up with a nice bow. Yes, I've done all my phases or stages, and now I'm finished with all of that, and I put that on a nice shelf. Grief is something that we learn to live with, because just like death is a universal for human beings, so is grief, and we need to accept that. Pandemic related grief is something on top of grief. So of course, there have been deaths during COVID that were related directly to COVID and were unrelated. Myself, my own uncle died in May of 2020. However, for others who don't experience a death related grief, pandemics bring a whole really a myriad forms of grief. With a pandemic comes a pandemic in its wake, and people have called this the tsunami of grief, the legacy of grief that COVID is giving us. And something called the Canadian Grief Alliance has put together a 4 pillars proposal to try to help Canadians figure out how we're going to live post-COVID with this tsunami of grief. So let's then talk about what that might look like in practice, because these are great concepts in theory, but let's figure out that. So as I've already said, people have experienced death-related loss during the pandemic. However, I have yet to meet a human being that I work with professionally or that I share my life with personally who isn't grieving something right now. These we refer to generally as non-death losses. You can grieve the loss of anything. You thought you were going to play varsity soccer this autumn at school. It was canceled because of COVID. You thought you were going to graduate last year with a big homecoming dance and a big graduation celebration, and that was altered to be online. A person can grieve the loss of anything that's significant to their physical, psychological, spiritual, interpersonal lives, anything they were expecting to happen that didn't. Some will feel minor, and some will feel manageable, others will feel devastating, and of course, life-altering. I'm sure that some of you can imagine that there are people in your lives where you can say, oh yes, you know, my 18-year-old daughter didn't get to convocate the way she thought she was going to, et cetera, et cetera. Throughout our lives, we're going to have non-death losses, but of course, a pandemic brings a whole other veil to that loss. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. So the thing with grief and loss is that we can't change the actual loss. That's a given. The loss has occurred, and we need to acknowledge that it is in fact a loss, and we need to honor the feelings that surround that. But really what we want to be able to do is have the skills and ideas and strategies to move forward in a better way, in a healthy way, because really the only option we do have is to move forward. So let's talk about how we as adults take care of the young people in our lives. And it goes back to that much used, but I think completely effective, when you fly and in the unlikely event of an oxygen depletion, the flight attendant very quickly at the beginning tells you, you put your mask on yourself first, and then you cover the mask of any children that you're traveling with. This is exactly the same with grief. You need to recognize that you too are grieving right now to be able to help the littles in your life navigate, honor, and move forward with their grief. You cannot help others until you help yourself. So really, let's have a look at what that all means. Right now, and the pandemic is ongoing, we have these conversations daily. Activities in the past, present, and future are altered or canceled altogether. My Thanksgiving did not look like it did the year prior, and it certainly resembled very little the year prior to that. No day looks the same. parameters are continually shifting. Premier Ford just let us know that there were new parameters, province to province. It depends. Really, there doesn't seem to be any sort of understanding of when it will all be over. And that's our next point. There's no clear end in sight. Yes, there are speculation. Yes, there are goals and objectives, because we always have to have hope, but we don't know exactly what that looks like and when that will happen. And we're all in this together, which is wonderful because it connects us and it makes us realize that we need to be kind and patient. And however, when you grieve in quote unquote normal circumstances, oftentimes you are the person grieving and your community of care steps up to support you. Well, now we're talking about everybody in a grieving situation. Who is doing the support? We're kind of having to navigate for ourselves. So the kinds of things we worry about, obviously, with pandemic-related grief: ambiguous loss, anticipatory grief, disenfranchised grief, and cumulative loss. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what each of those mean in a nutshell. Anticipatory grief is pretty self-explanatory. You were looking forward to something, it didn't come to fruition, or it was so changed that you didn't quite understand. An actual fear of potential losses. Well, if Brad looked that way, then my summer job will be ridiculous, et cetera, et cetera. Ambiguous loss means it's gone away, but you really don't have any understanding of why. Maybe there's rep hockey this fall, but no soccer. How come hockey wins over soccer? It's because they had to choose, but why, but why? And our young people are confused as to why we make those kinds of choices. Disenfranchised grief is a little bit more concerning because it's a grief that goes unacknowledged or unvalidated by social norms. When we went into lockdown situations and people had to really stay in place at home, a lot of my young people who are LGBTQ plus to us had to return to homes that weren't particularly safe spaces for them. A lot of them were grieving the life that they had in their school spaces where they could be perhaps more true to themselves and feel more secure about themselves. So this is a grief that society doesn't necessarily understand, but it is a valid grief regardless. And finally, of course, cumulative, again, self-explanatory, one grief upon another upon another. So you're busy trying to process one loss and then another loss hits you and then another. And oftentimes I heard my students say, I just don't know how much more I can take. And I myself have been culpable of saying that kind of thing. You know, I just don't know how I'm going to kind of forward ahead. So it's not so much the straw that broke the camel's back, it's that lovely invisible fiber that's holding you together and trying for you to be able to support the young people in your life. So some things that we can do as adults, because children are watching and children are listening. So again, we name it to tame it. And by naming it, we honor that it's a valid feeling. What am I missing? I'm missing the be able, that my mother can't play pickleball with her mates right now. What are you anticipating that you will lose down the line? If you can't narrow down your losses, name your general response. Are you feeling particularly more anxious these days? Are you weary? Are you easily upset or quick to cry over things that perhaps in the past you might not? You can also practice validating yourself. I'm in my book chat group at hospice right now. We're exploring Megan Devine's It's Okay That You're Not Okay, because it is okay that you're not okay. The expectation really is that we're all really kind of working hard to be okay. And the best thing to do is to say, I'm feeling sad. I'm having a rough week. I would love it if I could talk to you a little bit about how I don't necessarily want to congregate this weekend with the family, et cetera, et cetera. So it's understandable to be struggling right now. And of course, you can self-validate by saying, you know what, I'm doing the best that I can with the tools that I've got right now. So I think we fall into this trap as adults, well-meaning adults, and we certainly do this with the best intentions. Comparative suffering. Wow, the people over there have it a lot worse than I have, so I should really just get on with life and not worry so much. That's, it's hard because I think what you really have to do is to say, yes, for sure, perhaps relative to other people's experiences. Perhaps I have so much to be grateful for, but you can hold two conflicting thoughts in your head at the same time. It's okay for you to acknowledge that you are grateful for the life that you might have right now, but it's also okay to say, I am also struggling with things opening up, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be comfortable with that kind of thing. I'm finding myself a little less happy these days, et cetera, et cetera. Find meaning, try to really zero in on the things in your everyday life that are purposeful for you, and perhaps try not to kind of look at the bigger picture where it's, oh, I'm not really sure when this is all going to be over. As one of my students said to me one afternoon, I just don't know if life will ever look the same. And I said, you know what, but I'm not sure it will look the same. But let's think about what's happening right now, because, you know, we really don't know how we're going to, you know, move through this. Let's try to kind of zero in on the now, staying present, and of course trying to do your best to maintain self-care. You know, are you doing your best with what you've got, again, with children at home, with COVID related job losses and employment? Of course, there are things that there are challenges all over the place, but with the skills and tools that you've got right now, are you doing perhaps the best with what you've got, and try to work within those parameters? So that brings us to our all important talk tonight. Once we figure out how we can kind of center ourselves and get ourselves a bit grounded in all of this grief, how can we take care of our littles? Well, again, let me remind you that, of course, if we're in these places during a pandemic, so are our young people. So children and adolescents are, of course, coming from these places during a pandemic. Activities in their past, present, and of course, future are altered and or canceled. No day looks the same. The flow is altered. There's a loss of routine. And for some of our young people, routine is paramount to how they navigate their day, whether in school, whether at home, etc. So that's, I mean, again, the griever feels that loss however they feel it. Also, young people are noticing that the parameters are continually shifting, and they don't know what each day will entail. So it's hard enough to be a young person navigating social spaces with other kids, especially, I would argue, our middle school and teenage children, who add to the mix social pressures, hormonal changes, academic expectations, and you know, that can make them very edgy. And of course, again, there's no clear end in sight. But here's the clinker, I think, for us as adults. Where adults once kind of had a general idea of how the world was functioning, and young people could kind of look to us and say, okay, well, you know, I may not agree with what this adult is saying right now, but they seem to understand the lay of the land. We're not able to answer those questions. When my pupil looks me in the eye and says, what is all, you know, when is all of this going to be finished? When am I going to not have to wear this mask in class? When am I going to have to, you know, not have to have sanitizer all over me? I don't have any answers. All I have is the ability to say, I don't know. Let's try to work together and move forward with this. And that can be very anxiety making for our young people. So how do we then support them while they're moving forward with all these things? Well, we can help. We got to name it to tame it. We don't want to shut them down when they start conversations about how they're feeling. We really need to lean in and listen. There's no fix-it situation. We as adults who care for young people, especially in the world of things like social work, education, but also parents, we want to make it better for the littles in our lives. We want to be able to say, oh, I want to make this better. I'll take this on for you. We can't. Unfortunately, there's no fixing this. So we can't fall into that trap. So we got to name it, and then we're going to figure out how we're going to tend to this grief. We can normalize their reactions and feelings. If it's not always helpful to say to a young person, I think you're overreacting. You know, this isn't really a big deal. We're going to have a virtual ceremony. Well, that's shutting down what they're saying. And so in doing so, what the young person hears is, my grief is not valid. I'm not being validated. So the ability to say, wow, I hear that that's really hard for you. And I'm really sorry, because I know you were really looking forward to that graduation ceremony. That is far more helpful for a young person. You didn't fix it, you didn't make it better, but you acknowledged where they were coming from. The other thing that we really need to not do is put a positive spin on everything. Again, you can hold two, you know, which seems kind of counterproductive, but two opposing ideas in your head simultaneously. So, I am completely bummed. We were supposed to go to Canada's Wonderland and we can't go because we can't all sit on a bus. Oh, but that's okay, because, you've got so-and-so happening on Saturday morning, and, that'll be extra fun. Yeah, positivity is wonderful, but when it becomes a little less helpful is when we're not acknowledging that the person is actually saying, I am losing something that's important to me. And in doing so, what they're asking you to do is say, yes, I hear that you're losing something, and for that I'm sorry, just as we would do for a death related loss. So putting a positive spin on it, not as helpful as we might think. Encourage self-care and gentleness with self. I noticed that my young people in my classes were getting very perfectionist about their work, very meticulous about the things that they can control. Try to lean in and let them know that, again, be gentle. Everybody's in the same situation. We're all trying to be patient and kind. And, I had situations in my classroom where if one of my grade 11 students fell asleep during a film that I was showing, I let them sleep. If that grade 11 student, who I know to be a good student, falls asleep, that's what that body needed in those moments while we were watching that film. Now, that's me coming at it as an educator in particular, but I think we need to really understand that in pandemic circumstances, it's very important to listen to our bodies, listen to what's being said, but also listen to what's not being said. I've heard parents share with me that their teenager is, even more lethargic than normal. Please try to just take into mind what they're carrying, and the weight of what the young people are carrying right now is very heavy. And finally, try whenever possible to keep to routines. And of course, that's the topic of our discussion, really. But I wanted to give that foreground to really help you understand why those routines are so important, and some of the things that you can do to reinforce them in your own lives. You also want to maybe be thinking about adhering to practices that create meaning for you as a family, or for you in your relationship with your young person. I had a hockey coach reach out to me not long ago asking about how he could support his team, in the sense that normally they'd be all in the dressing room, the locker room, and they'd be having great, rituals and so forth pre-game. We talked about how those rituals can still happen, but perhaps might be altered for social distancing purposes, etc. But keeping them going is really key. And I'm going to explain why I believe that to be true. So routines, some of the really basic things, meals, regular meals. Families are busy, and I worked at a school where we had a breakfast program and a lunch program. So I had the privilege of being able to eat both breakfast and lunch with my students. Maybe in your house, the evening meal is the time for you to congregate. Think about things like if you've always had a Taco Tuesday, make a point of trying to really always have a Taco Tuesday. It's interesting how simple routines that you have, or rituals that you have in your family already, are that much more important right now. Again, meals, meeting for meals, taking time to perhaps check in with one another, making time for exercise, routines. If you're a family that has a pet that needs walking, maybe instead of just one person, oh sure, fine, I'll take the dog for a walk. Maybe you can make that a routine that every afternoon you walk the dog with one of your children, or both your children go out together. Uh, school. School's a really big one, and I have never seen rates of school phobia as high as they have been during the pandemic. Um, Being online, being offline, being in person, being hybrid, our kids have been put through the academic ringer. Small wonder that some of them are really not interested in engaging in school. The, the bottom line, however, is that school offers routines, offers accountability. So even if you're in a situation where a child is feeling that they can even only just go mornings, or right now, some of our high schoolers in Ontario are doing quadmesters. So maybe just saying, okay, right now you've got English lit and you've got French. Let's find times of the day where we can talk about your homework and da da da, etc. Offering routines that are really important. Really important too, if there are things that you can do. If Sunday morning your family always had an opportunity to go for a drive, or if you're a family of faith and you have practices where you do things on weekends or any other night that's appropriate to your faith, then try to do those, but perhaps they look a little bit differently. I know at one point when I was living in rural Manitoba, they had drive-in faith ceremonies where people would go and be a part of the faith gathering, but in a COVID friendly way. So again, not necessarily saying, oh, well, restrictions mean that, X, Y, and Z are no longer, perhaps just trying to be creative about how you can keep those things going, but also in the back of your mind, realizing that those routines are often invaluable to our young people. And you'll find to the dynamic in your household generally, because they're, in all this uncertainty, what we do know is that establishing a daily routine can help you create a familiar and predictable rhythm, or reinforce one that's already there. So if we're roller coasting through life, a routine, now I'm not talking about a super rigid one, but if you're a family that enjoys a book at bedtime, please understand that all those things you're doing already are wonderful things, because those routines are really helping buoy your younger person in all of this uncertainty. And again, of course, we can't eliminate the grieving, but we can offset the uncertainty that comes with pandemic related grief. So value for sure. And research, of course, shows that routines support all kinds of healthy social, emotional development. So many articles have said, oh, the kids are going to be left behind. School hasn't looked the way it's supposed to for all these years. And I think my toddler's regressing, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, there are going to be professionals who tell us that the pandemic, of course, has thrown us for a loop. However, the things that we do have on hand are things like routines, where we can have them in place or introduce them so that children say, okay, it's Wednesday. Wednesday's my day to empty the dishwasher. It seems very small and it seems almost trite for me to say it, but these kinds of things really seem to be making a difference in all of this uncertainty. It's a little bit of certainty. And then we have something called rituals. And I mean, because of COVID, of course, some of our death-related rituals have gone completely out the window. My uncle, as I've shared, died in May of 2020. There has yet to be a celebration of life. We haven't looked into a Zoom funeral, but we have sort of placed ourselves as his circle of the people who loved him in this kind of limbo, where we're sort of anticipating perhaps having something at the end of all of this, but it's a tough space to be in as people who have cared about this being who is no longer here with us. But rituals also, I mean, they are death related, as you can see from the examples on the screen, but they are also, as I said, rituals can also be quite simply things that families or couples or even one person does that kind of, again, buoy us in these times of uncertainty. I am a rock collector. I love to collect rocks. I have noticed that all kinds of everywhere these days, there are beautiful painted rocks. People have collected rocks, done lovely little messages. Sometimes they're messages of encouragement. I use them with my own grief clients, and we place them around the hospice here or in their own gardens. These are rituals for us to remember those that perhaps have died during COVID, but they're also little rituals that we can do as families and as people together, because really what we're talking about in all this uncertainty is that we want to keep those relationships going with the people who, of course, are still here, but also with the people who have gone. Many families already have rituals in place. Taco Tuesdays is a big one in my house. I've already mentioned faith-based services or anything like that on a day of worship. And please understand that these are direct quotes from I'll show you, I'll cite them at the end. Sometimes there's a Friday night pizza night, Saturday movie nights, book at bedtime, et cetera, et cetera. They can occur daily or less frequently. Perhaps it's something you do a month. My book club and I decided we were going to meet weekly so that we could keep the momentum going of this particular book that's quite heavy, but perhaps it's something you do on a monthly basis. Rituals have been shown through research to buffer the impact of stress and trauma on mental health. Well, how lovely to think that we could do something that might help us again, not eliminate, but alleviate some of the stress and COVID-related or pandemic-related trauma. So again, if you are experiencing death during the pandemic, I am truly sorry. And I completely appreciate that. I'm sure you have lots of questions about how you will acknowledge the death or the loss in your lives. And again, some of the things that we know that have been helpful for others in the past, acknowledge that you are in a hard situation. Again, Megan Devine tells us it's okay that you're not okay. What are we going to do next? So acknowledge that it's hard. Give yourself permission to feel what you're feeling without coming down on yourself. Oh, it's just, the way all life is. Sure. But again, it's the way life is for everyone, and it's hard. Maintain boundaries. We're very quick in this world of COVID, of course, to move online, but you can also keep yourself safe from too much or tough things by maintaining how much social media you're involved in. And that's something I do say to my young clients. Give yourself a social media break. Sometimes we're on there to the detriment of our mental health. And so I think it's always fair to say to our young people, you know what, let's go for a walk in the woods and, let's leave our phones at home. I have yet to have a young person who insists on having their phone when we have a grief activity or just be with one another and not perhaps with a screen in between us. Write a letter to the person who died or write a letter about your loss. I am really unhappy that I can't get my driver's license right now because, the Department of Motor Vehicles is so backed up COVID wise, so I'm going to write about how hacked off I am that I can't do the things I want to do. Name it to tame it. Attend or host an online funeral service, a celebration of life, a birthday, a fun Friday night. My mother's been playing bridge online since COVID started. 3 of her lovelies and herself every Saturday night log on. My mother's in her 70s, and they play bridge, and they all have their beverage of choice with them, and they play bridge together. So if you're missing something, how could you potentially do something that's not exactly the same, but that might again alleviate some of that? Honor the person who has died, stay connected to family, friends, and support. And of course, if you are struggling to process, reach out to Hospice Simcoe, the wonderful people at Hospice Simcoe. My team is incredible and always waiting for you to reach out so we can lean in and support you. Please understand again that it's okay to be feeling what you feel. And as my puppet Phoebe, who is asleep at home right now, would say, you got to feel all the feels. So let yourself feel all the feels without things that I can control. And again, I think if you take a moment to look at the meme, it's pretty clear that these are the things that are associated with routines, rituals, expectations that are sort of civic. Our young people are in our high schools do, community service hours, and they're asking, society asks them to be altruistic and thinking about others. These are really the things that we can control in our lives, even in a pandemic. Outside, of course, are the things that we can't control. So I try to say that. I say we can't control COVID. We can only control how we respond to what COVID brings to us, right? So the pandemic has expectations that we behave differently, that we dress differently. And really, that's the only thing that we can do, is decide that we're going to respond and move forward with our choices. So the fact is, of course, is that our lives post-loss, any loss, are dramatically different than they used to be. And that's something that some people have difficulty wrapping their heads around sometimes, because especially young people is what I mean, because young people will say it's just not the same. And really the only answer to that is no, it isn't the same. And again, you don't want to do the positivity spin and, well, but it's going to be better. And because no child wants to hear while they're, processing their loss and truly identifying their loss, that there's this flip switch, and that the loss, of course, oh, but it's all going to be better. Our lives post-loss are dramatically different than they used to be. And that's a fact. But also a fact, our lives can still be really good. Not the same, but they can be really good. And I think that puts it quite nicely, because things won't be the same. And what's really important is that by staying present, of course, we don't have those issues of where our young people, who are particularly anxious, some of them, are already anticipating, well, what if this isn't finished in 6 months? Well, what if this is still going on a year from now? Well, I'm supposed to be applying to university in a few months. Like, what's that going to look like? And so on. Because by projecting, we lose sight of the ability to stay present and kind of move forward with our loss, but in manageable chunks. When we start to anticipate, of course, it's again beyond our control. And ironically, anxiety and anticipatory stuff, 99% of the time, is never what we anticipate. It never actually happens. So reminding our young people and ourselves, I think, and I do this on the daily as well, trying to stay as present as we can, work with what we've got in front of us, and perhaps just know as we tuck ourselves into bed at night that we're doing the best that we can with the access, the skills, and the tools that we have. So at that point, I really just wanted to know if anybody had any questions or comments or suggestions about anything that was said, or any particular issues that people are actually trying to support at the moment, without obviously sharing any information that you don't want to be shared among us here on the platform.
Keri-Lyn, that's really, really awesome. Actually, I was just messaging Colleen, and I was like, we need to send this immediately to all the families we're supporting, because I think it was very, very validating to hear everything that you said. So I hope that families that we send this to, I know will feel very validated.
Good. I think that's so vital, and I'm really pleased that you've brought that up. I gave a similar talk to educators who had contacted me and wanted some support about educating the kids in their classrooms. And one educator said just that. She said, I just feel so happy that I feel seen, that you've let me know that I am doing my best, and really, um, yeah, I mean, we're all navigating in unfamiliar territory, and I think that's so important. Um, and I think for parents in particular, I am not a parent, full disclosure, so major kudos and respect. But I think as parents, it must be doubly hard because as an educator, I go to bed worrying about how my kids in my class are doing. I can only imagine what parents are feeling right now in particular. So they parents do need to know that they're doing the best with what they've got, and that they are being seen. um so yeah, so important.
Carrie, there's just a question here. How much of a nudge should we be giving our children when we see them in a slump?
Yeah, that's a great question, and again, you're the expert in your own family dynamic, so I can really only say have suggestions. But if I were to come across a child in my education or in my midst who I knew to be perhaps not behaving as I would normally see them behaving, I think what I like to call this is and it's the Gottman's, it's his big theory about it's the Gottman Institute's theory about relationships, and it's called beck and call. Very simple concept where you put out a sort of beck and leave it there and then see what kind of answer you get. If this young person is a teenager, this is particularly important because I think sometimes, certainly in my own experience with young people, teenagers do have a tendency to shut down if confronted by something, or if they feel that you've assessed a situation and they kind of feel got at or assessed without being able to represent themselves. um, I have simply said in the past, and this has been effective, um, I don't know, but and please tell me if this is way off base, but you don't seem yourself these days, or you seem quieter than normal, and I'm just checking in. I'm just checking in, and I'm wondering how you're doing with things. And if at the first response is, "No, I'm fine," you get a sort of knee jerk, "No, it's nothing, fine." I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, because I think what you've done there is you've opened up that opportunity to have those conversations. Those are tough conversations to have. No young person wants to admit that they're, you know, necessarily to their mom, their dad, their guardian, their, care provider. They don't necessarily, their teacher, want to say, yeah, God, like this weird COVID thing, like what the hell? But what you've done is you've kind of said, I see you, I recognize that you're not maybe where you might normally be, and I'm just going to leave that there with you. And interestingly, the times that I've done that, the teenager, and they were teenagers, they came back to me in a quiet moment, maybe not the same day, but they came to me and they said, you know what you said before, like, I think you're right, and can we talk about it? And I found that that has really opened up that gateway for conversation. I think too, what I love about that approach is that you've given power is such a powerful word, so maybe that's not what I mean, but I think what you've done there is you've given them the autonomy to kind of say, they go away and they're kind of insightful about themselves. They get a little bit introspective and they think, wow, yeah, you know what, like, I have been feeling a little blah, and mom's just picked up on that. You know what, yeah. And then they circle back and they say, yeah, I am feeling a little, I'm wondering if I don't know, we can talk about it or whatever. The other thing that I found really effective too, in my own experience, is sometimes I'll lean in and say, hey, I sense that something's up. If I'm not the person maybe that you want to talk to about this, like if I get a response where the kid says, yeah, like I have a lot on my plate right now, and like I don't even, I don't even know where to start. I'll often give the young person the ability to either open up to me or to open up to somebody else. So yeah, I sense that you were really dealing with something there. I would love, to talk with you about it. Or if I'm not the person you want to talk to, is there somebody that you wouldn't mind talking with? I found out a couple of times that it was another member of staff. Yeah, like, do you think you could tell Mr. So and so that I'm feeling this way because I'm feeling particularly stressed in his class? And what I was there able to do was able to be the kind of the liaison between this young person and that other teacher, which worked beautifully because it turned out that particular class was exacerbating it. Maybe there's an older sibling in the house, so if I'm not somebody you want to talk to, do you think there's somebody else? And maybe then again, you're giving the young person the opportunity to say, like, really give it a think and say, yeah, you know what, I would love to talk this out with Carl. Do you think Carl would listen? And then you've actually kind of been the conduit for that. I think the last thing that I think would be a lovely thing too is normalize it. Hey, I've picked up that you've been feeling a bit down. It's really hard to be a squishy human right now. And I think you'll find sometimes, especially as an educator, squishy human, kids love that phrase. But I think kind of accepting in front of your young person that you're fallible too. And, it is hard to be a squishy human right now. Again, it opens up those channels, right? And it says to that young person, you are seen, the people around you are here for you, and you take your time, right? You take your time and figure out how you want to play this.
Thanks, Keri-Lyn. We do have another question. Is sharing our grief of loss with our children triggering for them? I'm not accustomed to grieving in front of them, but also want to show them my experience to validate that it's okay.
Okay, lovely. Love this question. Thank you so much. I think that it is okay. And here's why I think that. First off, I think we as parents, as educators, I think we are modelers. We model things for our young people, especially our really young people. So first off, again, it goes back to that whole issue of normatizing or making things much more things that children see and say, oh yeah, it's okay to be sad. There's a wonderful meme going around where it's a children's picture book and it says, I fell down and I hurt my knee. I was gonna cry, but I didn't. Instead, I was brave. And somebody scratched it out and said, I wanted to cry, so I did, because crying is brave. And I think children really need to know that it's not weak to show emotion and to feel all the feels and to truly miss someone or something. Strength lies in our ability to have those emotional responses and to honor those. So yes, I think modeling is wonderful. I will say though, in my experience, professional and personal, I never include or exclude children from rites, rituals, feelings, discussions without discussing with them first. So what I mean by that is if you're having a quiet cry and your child comes upon you and says, oh, mommy, why are you so sad? Then I think it's important to honor that question. I'm crying because I am sad. Would you like me to explain why I'm feeling sad? Well, yeah. Why are you feeling sad? I am missing grandpa. Grandpa was my daddy and I'm missing him. Do you understand that it's okay for me to be sad and to miss him? And that gets those communication channels open about those kinds of things. When we do things surreptitiously, or we save our grief or mourning moments, if you will, for when the children are asleep or when the children are not around us, they don't have the ability to see those as regular human things. And what we don't see, we don't understand. The other part of that too, I think that's important is, so your little comes to you and you want to include them in your grief. How wonderful that you, as a trusting adult, can help them with their own grief. So rather than perhaps you grieving separately and not including your child, then you don't run the risk is a strong word, but then your child doesn't go to bed at night feeling all those feels, because they're also sad, but thinking, well, mommy's not sad or telling me that she's upset about anything, so maybe it's wrong for me to be feeling these things. And now you've got this little person questioning their own grief. So far from triggering, I really do believe, and Danielle and Keri-Lyn, of course, are my colleagues in the field, I really do believe that it's important that we share, but that we include children in we have discussions, and then we include them because they've made that choice, or we exclude them. I had a young person who said her mother asked her to be at the bedside of their dying father. And the young griever said to me, I don't think I can do it. I know my mom wants me to do it, and I don't think I can do it. And I said, well, let's talk about what you understand about what that might look like. And she said, I can't even think about what it's going to look like. And I said, well, what if you could regulate that yourself, and you could say to your mom, I can be there until I need to step away. I can be there until I feel I might need a break. I would like to see if I can be there. Opened up this huge dialogue between she and the mom, and they came to an understanding because the young person had the ability to opt in for what she felt that she can handle, but also make an informed choice about what she felt she could handle. You're not going to the funeral because children don't go to funerals. You're coming to the funeral, you're wearing your best outfit, but we're not going to explain why you're going to the funeral. There's that lovely gray in the middle where we get to have those really important conversations where we say, listen, grandma's died and we're going to have this thing called a funeral. Do you want me to tell you what that's all about? And that gets those conversations opening. And then children make informed decisions. Hope that's helpful.
I thought that was very helpful. So hopefully the individual who asked found that helpful. So just being aware of the time, do we have any kind of last questions for Keri-Lyn? I know that you are pretty open to conversation too. So if somebody has a question, perhaps afterwards, they could reach out to us and we could forward that on, if that's okay.
Absolutely. No,
Yeah,
absolutely.
great.
Always willing to. And again, please understand that, yes, I have a business card that says that I do this kind of work for a living, but when we grieve, we are the experts in our grief, right? So it's really also important that you trust your instincts, that you ask these questions and ask for input. Absolutely, so important, and how wonderful that you're able to do that. But also too, chances are good if it feels right, then you're probably doing really well.
Thanks so much. This has been really, really helpful, and I can't wait to share it with more people. So thanks for everybody who came today, and we really look forward to getting some feedback. Please engage with us, contact us, reach out to us, and we would love to connect. So thanks you, everybody.
Thanks so much. I just wanted, as a parting thing, I am also bilingual. So I know that there are some French families in your catchment area. So I do also work in French, and my puppet is also bilingual. So yes, please feel free. Unfortunately, I can only offer service in those two languages, but I'm always happy to help. And thank you so much for the opportunity, Keri-Lyn and Danielle. This is important work that you are organizing and that you're affording people. So thanks for letting me be a part of it tonight.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for everything that you do too.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.